We are on sign number 4, the feeding of the 5,000. This is found in John chapter 6, starting in verse 5. So let's just read that. Here's what it says. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are these for so many people?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now, there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number of about 5,000. And Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated. Likewise, also of the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they were filled, he said to the disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." So that's John chapter 6, verses 5 through 14. And it tells the story about Jesus feeding the 5,000. Well, there's a couple things that we want to remember, a couple things that we want to learn. First question, though, is what are we supposed to learn about Jesus? What does this tell us about his character, about who he is? As we talk about this, we want to recognize who is being affected, right? That's the last thing that we see. When the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Did they know he was the King of Kings? Did they know he was the Son of God? They knew that he was from God, right? This is the prophet. Here's what they collectively say. We know that and we recognize that he has some kind of connection. There's something going on between him and God. We just don't realize that he is the God. He is only God. Wow. Okay, so that's a big stretch. And Jesus doesn't correct that. Jesus accepts that. In fact, there's a little bit more, because here in just a second, they are going to try to, they're going to try to make Jesus the king. Verses 15 and beyond, it says that they want to make Jesus the king, and he's going to escape from them. He's not ready to be their king. In fact, they want an earthly king. He's going to be their heavenly king. And so there's a lot of things going on in this process. We want to see what effect Jesus had on the people at this time. This is also one of the first signs that we see where Jesus is affecting more than just a few people at a time. Right? There's 5,000 men, actually 5,000 men that are seated. These are the ones that they're counting. Who knows how many women and children and everybody that's with them? But the men they're kind of focused on. It's 5,000 of them. So there's a lot of people that are gathered around here. Right? Families and all of this. We even see one little boy that comes up that Andrew actually brings to Jesus. It's the first time we see this mass group of people that are recognizing this is something special happening amongst us. Up until this point, we've just seen Jesus at a wedding, right? There's just a few people. In fact, he doesn't tell anybody. When he heals the paralytic there at Bethesda, he doesn't tell anybody that he's Jesus. He finally comes back and tells that man who used to be paralyzed. So we see those kind of things. We see the ruler over in Capernaum, and we'll talk about Capernaum again next week. But we see these kind of people that are gathered around, small groups. So why? What does that say about Jesus and his plan? What does that tell us? A couple of other things we look at. Verse 6. Verse 6 is one of those cool verses that you wonder what exactly is going on, right? So verse 6 says, "This he was saying to test Philip," right? He had just said to Philip, "Where are we going to buy bread for all of these people?" Philip says, I don't know. Do you have any idea? Jesus was doing this to test. Remember, that's one of the rules for looking through the Bible. When Jesus asks a question, he knows the answer. He asks the question for you and me. So what would you answer if he said, "What are we going to do to feed all of these people? How are we going to get the bread to feed all these people?" Right? He already knows. He was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. So that's really cool. Do you feel like you've been tested like that? And how did you do on that test? How would you do if that test had happened today? Can you focus more on the bread or more on what God is actually doing? All right, so that's one thing, one theme that we see right there. Also, what do the disciples do with this question? How do they answer this question? Philip is going to talk to all of the guys, right? All of the disciples. Hey, Jesus wants this. So what are they going to answer him? How are we going to take care of this? Can we sell some stuff? What do we need to do? Can we go fishing and get enough fish for all of these? There's no way. And then Andrew, I think, is a cool thing because almost every time you see Andrew in the Bible, he's bringing somebody to Jesus. Here he brings this boy to Jesus. Now think about what has to happen, right? Andrew's looking with all of the disciples. They're all looking. So Andrew is looking for some kind of food to give to all of these people. He sees one boy with just 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish. Now you realize that's more than a boy has for lunch. So probably what happens here is that boy has the lunch for the family. Maybe the dad has said, you hold on to the lunch for all of us. We're going to go hear Jesus together. Maybe the dad actually gave the boy that meal and said, you go and visit Jesus. Let the little children come to him. That kind of thing, right? So Andrew's looking, spots this meal, and takes a boy with the meal to Jesus. And when they get there, that's what is going to happen with the disciples' answer. We are trying to trust in you. That's hard. That's hard to do. But this is Andrew's best answer. We don't know what you can do with this. With man, it's impossible. What happens with God? It's a question. It's a hope. It's a prayer. It's an offering. Same way that we would make offerings. So, this is a test, and we want to ask how they did. And how would you do with this kind of test? Also, here's a question. Was all of this for the sake of the test for the disciples? Did all of this happen so that Jesus could grow their faith? The 5,000 are fed, and that's an amazing thing. But you get the sense that Jesus is really checking on these 12 guys. In fact, that's where the leftovers go, isn't it? There's 12 baskets full of bread at the end of all of this. There's 12 disciples that we know of. And so here's how that's kind of happening. Is all of this done for them? It's a reminder that God works for you. God loves you. Yes, he loves us. Yes, he works, and all of us benefit. But God loves you. That's an important thing to remember. He's focused on these little things. Even though there's a crowd of people benefiting, he's focused on these little things. And my last question, did the people make a correct assumption of who Jesus was when they said, surely this is the prophet? Is that correct? How do we feel about that? What does the Bible go on to say about who Jesus actually is? Was he pleased with that assessment? Was he honored by that assessment? One other thing I want to make note of, and this is something that's so valuable, so important in this text, that is Jesus feeds the 5,000 with bread. Now, you want to think about thematically what's happening here in John. And remember the time when Jesus went into the wilderness. Before his formal ministry actually started, Jesus goes into the wilderness, and he's tempted by the devil in 3 ways. The second way that Jesus is tempted is that the devil takes him up to a high point and says, you can actually cast yourself off of this high building, this pinnacle of the building. You can cast yourself off, won't even stub a toe. That's what's written in the Bible. And Jesus says, no, we're not going to tempt or test the Lord our God. All right, so that's the second temptation. The third temptation is actually the devil takes him to a high mountain, looks all over the area and says, how'd you like to rule this place? You can rule it. You can have it all if you just bow down to me, right? You'll be the ruler of all of this stuff, which is exactly what happens with these people, right? They are actually, after this miracle of the feeding of them, they want to make Jesus the king. And so that's exactly what could happen. Once again, that's the second time that we see Jesus actually deny that idea, deny kingship. I've got something better, which is a great theme throughout the Bible. Christ has something better than just this rule right here. I'm going to rescue your souls, not just your bodies. But think about the first temptation of Jesus. What was that first temptation? Jesus is hungry. He's been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. He's been out in the wilderness. And the devil comes up to him and says, how'd you like to turn these stones into bread? Now, you know, of course, that Jesus, he could have done that very easily. And he could have fed himself. Perfect, right? Instead, what he's going to do is later on, he's going to feed 5,000. And that's really the temptation that the devil is putting on him there in the beginning. The devil is saying, a good king feeds his people. And if you turn these stones into bread, man, there's a lot of stones. So all these people would be fed. Jesus is going to do that anyway, on his own terms, the way that God would have it done. But he denies that original temptation as a way of saying, when it's God's time to work, it's God's time to work. And that would be something we would learn and remember as well, is that we can be patient for God, that his plan is actually a better plan. And there will be a time when we are fed spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. There will be a time when we're fed. It's God's timing. It's not our timing. So the word for the feeding of the 5,000 is really the word patience. God's got something better just down the road. And that's Matthew 6, the first part of Matthew 6, verses 5 through about verse 14. Thanks so much. God bless you. Have a great day.